listening to 91 Reasons, a journey into the twisted landscape of pop culture. Keep your hands and arms inside the podcast at all times. And now, the voice, Jeff Tucker.
It seems strange now, but I had to be dragged to go see Back to the Future. At the time, was that summer 1985, I was still a Star Wars fan, huge Star Wars fan. And I know that Return of the Jedi was re-released in 85 with the very strange poster of the Death Star blowing up, and I think Luke's head somewhere in the middle. But there were a bunch of us big Star Wars fans who went to that Return of the Jedi re-release and stayed all the way through the credits, just knowing that there was going to be a trailer for whatever the next Star Wars film was that we knew was going to come out in 1986 because it followed the 3-year cycle of each film. Sadly, the movie ended and the trailers ran, the credits ran, and there was nothing. There was no Star Wars film on the horizon. From reading Starlog, we knew that George Lucas had moved on to producing Labyrinth with Jim Henson, and Lucasfilm itself was working on what was going to be the summer event of 1986, Howard the Duck. So there was a gap, and I'll never forget my brother dragged me to see Back to the Future, and I had to be convinced to go because I was a Lucas man. You know, I liked Spielberg's movies. They were good, but I supported anything George Lucas put out. And I don't know. This movie's just when I saw the trailer, it just didn't appeal to me. You know, the trailer where the girl walks up to the car, the DeLorean, and knocks on the window, and the window rolls down, and she says, "How far are you going?" And he says, "About 30 years." And there's no indication as to what the movie's about. So there's only been a few movies in the entire lifetime I've had of going to the movies where I went to a theater completely blind, not knowing what the movie was, any plot at all. You know, Back to the Future is it's a great title for a movie, but going in blind, it doesn't give you any indication what the film is actually about. And I think that after what sparked with Back to the Future, I didn't go in blind to a movie again until 1988 with Beetlejuice, which is another podcast, another story of going into a movie blind somewhere down the line. But I went in blind to see Back to the Future. And, oh my gosh, what do you say about a movie that changes your life? You know, Star Wars set me on the path of wanting to be somehow involved in special effects in the movies. But Back to the Future was what made me really want to be a writer. I had written a few things before then for school, just small projects. But seeing Back to the Future, and it's weird because Back to the Future is classified as a science fiction. And yes, it is a science fiction in that Marty travels through time. But there are very few special effects shots in the movie other than Einstein's journey and the flame trails, and then the Marty's journey is done POV through the windshield, so there's just a flash and he's back in time. So there isn't another special effects shot in Back to the Future from Einstein's reappearance in Frozen. There isn't another special effects shot, I think, until the lightning storm and the clock tower being hit by lightning, and then Marty going back in time. So it's classified as a science fiction movie. It's a summer movie, but what blew me away with Back to the Future is that the script is it's amazing. It is probably the finest, tightest movie script ever written. I know, a blasphemy, right? So many other grand movies are out there. I didn't say grand or had weight, but as far as what a script is supposed to do, Back to the Future is perfect. It's flawless. Everything pays off. Everything is set up. Everything pays off. By the end, when the characters start to do things, you're right there with them because you've been set up to know, oh, this is familiar. This is what's going to happen. Gosh, Back to the Future is truly an amazing movie. I walked out of that theater just stunned, completely stunned that you could feel that way about a movie, that all these emotions are in you. Gosh, Back to the Future made me want to be a writer. It made me want to be in entertainment. It made me want to meet Michael J. Fox more than anything in the world. It made me want to drive a DeLorean. It made me want to, more than Star Wars, I wanted to jump into that movie. I wanted to live in Hill Valley. I wanted to believe that Hill Valley was a real place, and that I could get in the car, since it was California, and just drive down the road to Hill Valley and just hang out at the clock tower and in Town Square. Sadly, it's not a real place, and it sort of crashes into you. It's real in so much as you can go to Universal Studios, and before it burnt down, the original sets were all still there forever, because I know that the clock tower set had been used in quite a few movies. I saw it in Inherit the Wind, and right before Back to the Future, it was used as Kingston Falls in Gremlins, with great shots of the clock tower and Town Square. But from the moment it was used, or from the moment that the Town Square Universal Studios set was used as Hill Valley, nothing else mattered. Nothing else mattered to Universal Studios. Nothing else mattered to me. It became Hill Valley. It became a place I wanted to visit. So coming out of that theater with all those emotions, there was nothing to do except go see it again and again and again. And I think I've seen Back to the Future in the theater more times than any other film that's ever been released. And I saw Star Wars, Empire, and Jedi quite a few times in the movie theater. But Back to the Future came out at just the right time, where I was mobile. I had a bike. My mother saw that this sparked in me this huge interest, and she was okay with giving me money and me riding my bike every day almost that summer from Norwalk all the way to Lakewood Mall, which is quite a distance. When I think about it now, the way things are now, you'd never let your 13 or 14-year-old kid ride his bike that far. It's quite a distance. But I used to get up in the morning, ride my bike all the way to Lakewood Mall for the big Pacific Theater there, and check out Back to the Future again and again and again. Sometimes getting a hot dog, sometimes getting popcorn, a lot of times getting nothing because I'd spent all my money on just the ticket. Locking my bike up out front, and after the movie, it'd still be there, and riding home and getting there just in time for my mom to get home at 5 o'clock in the afternoon. I saw it at the big Pacific Theater there in Lakewood, the kind where the curtains opened before the movie started. Pacific Lakewood, you could do a whole podcast about it being simply the finest movie theater anywhere around the area where I grew up. If it was a movie of merit that deserved to be seen on the big screen, you went and saw it at the Lakewood Mall Big Pacific. Now, they had a smaller one that was Lakewood South, and they opened up the smaller movies there, and the big movies then moved from the big screen in the middle to the smaller screen on the south. And I can remember seeing Back to the Future on the big screen many times, and then jumping over to the south when it started to play there. I even went and saw it later that summer in a double feature with Teen Wolf at the Stonewood Mall. And that was I take it back, it wasn't even a double feature. This is what a nerd I was. It was a 2-screen Stonewood Shopping Center, not the mall. It's a mall now, but it used to be an outdoor shopping center. And the movie theater there had 2 screens, and Back to the Future was playing on one side, and Teen Wolf was playing on the other. And I went and saw both, and I remember paying for both, and even the guy in the ticket booth just being completely bewildered that I didn't just switch theaters. But I was far too honest for that kind of the kind of shenanigans, the kind of thievery. I wanted to pay for the movies. I think more than anything, being honest, and also wanting to keep the ticket stubs, because for years I kept all my ticket stubs in a big jar of every movie I saw. And Back to the Future, there were so many, I could have had a small ticker tape parade. But yeah, I saw it at multiple theaters. Eventually, it went to the $1.50 theater, Alondra 6. You remember that's where I saw Star Wars. But by 1985, it had become a $1.50 theater where you could watch movies all day for just a few bucks. But then I saw it there a lot because Laundry 6 was a lot closer to my house. Instead of a 2-hour bike ride, it was just probably 25 minutes or less, going right down there to see it. And I saw it again and again and again. I could have done Rocky Horror to Back to the Future the amount of times I've seen the first movie in the theater, just over and over again. I wanted to quite literally be Marty McFly. It's hard to describe. That fall, when I went back to school, I carried the movie novelization with me everywhere that I went. I got one of those vests that Marty wears, the life preserver vest, and I wore it to school over a jean jacket with the gray cutouts in it. And people would, I'll never forget, there was a girl in my math class, Jenny Dowling. She looked at the cover of the book, and then she looked at me, and she just shook her head and said, "Nerd," and then went back to her work. And you know what? I didn't care. I had a movie. The movie was my friend. I had tons of friends. It's not like I was a loner. But Back to the Future just became my thing. I just idolized every part of that movie. I analyzed it. I saw it so many times. It's the one movie that I can quote every single line of dialogue. It's the only movie I know really by heart of all the pauses and music cues and the dialogue. It just became what I wanted to do, what I wanted to be. And I know it's weird to say that a movie is what you want to do and what you want to be, but everybody has that thing they fixate on. Kids fixate on the craziest things. And for me, Back to the Future was it. So it came out summer 1985, and it played all the way through spring of 1986. I think it was March or April that it came out on home video, but it played all the way up through its release on home video, and even a few weeks after, because I know after it came on home video, I still saw it 2 or 3 times at the Alondra 6, because there was one thing to have it at home, it was another to go see it at the theater, because that's where a movie comes to life. Back to the Future on the small screen, still a great movie, but it's not, the whole experience of being in the theater and not being able to pause it. And if you got to go to the bathroom, you run to the bathroom and you go as fast as you can and you get back to your seat because the movie is still going. But of course, the scenes that are safe to go, because I had seen it so many times, me and by myself and with David Lewis, a good friend of mine at the time, just over and over again. And I remember finding out that it was coming on home video. This is back when the home video releases were unknown. A movie could take a year, it could take 2 years. E.T. took 8 years or 7 years. Back to the Future, it was a real unknown. When's it going to come out on home video? And I got the date because there was a small video store by my house in the parking lot there of the Del Taco. There was one of those tiny mom and pop video stores, and he had all the signs. Now, we didn't rent there because those mom and pop stores, you had to have a credit card to rent. And my mom, I don't think she had a credit card, or if she did, she didn't have it at a point where you could use it as collateral. They'd probably just either decline it, or remember back in the day where sometimes you'd hand your credit card to the clerk and he'd cut it with scissors. I remember working at Spencer Gifts and actually you swipe the card and it says call, so you call thinking you're going to get a confirmation number for their sale, and instead the guy on the phone says, "Is she standing right there, the card holder?" I said, "Yeah." And he says, "I need you to just cut the card up in front of her." And I said, "Okay, I certainly will." And then I just hung up and I gave the card back to the customer. It's like, I'm not the police. I'm not going to cut the card up. That's not my job. Because I think she was crying. It was a whole deal. But no, we had our video membership at 2 places. The main place we rented was Video Depot in the Norwalk Square. I think it was one of the first video stores to even open in the area. Video Depot was a real nice place. I think it was carpeted. It had these nice wooden shelves. I remember going in there when we got our first VCR, which was a beta, of course. We never did anything normal. My mother got a good deal somewhere on a top-loading beta with a wired remote that went out about 4 feet. But going into Video Depot was great. The first video I ever rented at Video Depot was Willy Wonka and the Chocolate Factory with Gene Wilder, which is one of my other most favorite movies of all time. And at the time that I rented it, I was just in awe because you had to normally wait for Willy Wonka to come on TV, and it was an event. Like nothing mattered except stopping to watch the movie. And the idea that I went somewhere and the rental was like $250 a day or something. I mean, that was a lot of money back then. But the idea that I could watch this movie as many times as I wanted, whenever I wanted, that was unbelievable. And I think I must have watched that beta copy of Willy Wonka the day that I rented it. I think I watched it 4 times all the way till 2 or 3 in the morning, just out of sheer, you just can't believe that it's available to you whenever you want, So when I found out that Back to the Future was coming out, my mother went to our other video store, which was Multi-Video, which was a much bigger store. They sold a lot of TVs and VCRs and sound systems, and they had the whole room up front where you could test out the sound system so you could see what stereo sound was like on your giant projection TV and all that. They had a salesman there, John Harvell, who was quite knowledgeable in all the audio-video needs you could have. But Multi-Video was like a supermarket. The floor was tile, and they had a turnstile, and they had a lot more movies. And it's funny, we rented movies at both Video Depot and Multi-Video, and neither one's ever had adult movies. So I know a lot of kids grew up with that secret little room with the Western saloon doors, but I never rented at those places. I never even had a concept of that. And at the video stores I worked, we never rented those either. So when I do a future episode about doing time in a video store, I'll have to get into that and how weird it was when people would come in and just be bewildered that we didn't offer those kinds of movies. Because I know they were very lucrative. They were probably very inexpensive to buy, and you made a lot of money off them. Whereas with regular studio releases, they were quite expensive. And I knew that when Back to the Future came out, the way that Multi-Video did their new releases is that they were going to get a ton of copies of VHS Back to the Future, but probably only one beta, because in 86, when Back to the Future came out on video, beta was on its way out. The writing was on the wall that beta was going to die. And I think I read somewhere the main reason beta was going to die was that beta was owned by JVC, and JVC wouldn't allow the adult films to be released on beta. And as we've learned with the internet and every major advancement in technology, if you don't support pornography, you go out of business. And beta was doomed. But there was a short window where you could get tons of beta, you could rent it, they sold it. And I knew there was going to be a copy of Back to the Future on beta on that shelf. And I begged my mom, you've got to go to the store on the day that it's out. You got to get there when they open. You got to go in. You got to get it. And I went to school that day, and I was nervous. There I am. I'm still dressed like Marty McFly, running around, and just hoping that my mother was going to get this movie for me. And I got home from school that day, and my mom gave me this really pained look, and she said, it was checked out, Jeff. They didn't have it. They didn't have it. And I was crushed, because this was the day. This was the day I was going to get Back to the Future at my house. And it's what's funny is that I had taken that beta machine, and I had recorded every at the movies, every movie review show. So I had tons of clips, and I had recorded the Power Love video. They even had a Johnny Be Good video where Marty was singing Johnny Be Good. It was released as a music video that MTV played. So I had so much footage that I had assembled like a really crude 20-minute version of the movie where, if you squinted and filled in the blanks with your imagination, it was kind of like watching the movie. You can see how desperate I was. It was weird too because Back to the Future had no merchandise. There was no way, and I had grown up, as you know, in the Star Wars generation, where if you saw it on the screen, it was at the toy store. And it was weird that Back to the Future, nothing. There was no merchandise. All they had was a mail-away 4x4 truck, but there was no toys, no fast food tie-ins, nothing. You were on your own, which is why I couldn't reenact the movie with action figures, so I had to become Marty McFly by dressing like him and quoting the movie and just destroying my novelization of it. But I remember looking at my mom I was so upset because now somebody else had this beta copy of Back to the Future. I wasn't going to get it. Who knows how many days? This person could have it for a week, and I wouldn't have Back to the Future. And back then, you have to understand that not every movie was available for sale the way it is today. There were two types of movies that video stores carried. The first was, and the main focus was, rental copies. And the other was sell-through. Sell-through meant the video store had them for sale. Disney movies were always available on sell-through. They were $29.95 usually. And then there were some releases that came out that were sell-through titles. I remember Batman was a big one, the 1989 Batman. Everybody had Batman. You could get Batman in a liquor store or a gas station for like $5. But the majority of movies that came out were $59.95, which back in 1985, what was the minimum wage? $2. So you're talking about a significant amount of time and money to invest on a videotape. It was cheaper to rent them. So you can imagine my surprise when my mom pulled out a beta copy of Back to the Future that she had purchased for me. I cried. It was the greatest day of my life. I had the movie, and it was mine. I didn't have to return it. I could watch it as many times as I wanted. This was one of the nicest things my mom ever did for me, and she did so many things for me as far as Star Wars toys and taking me to the Worldcon and basically indulging all of my weirdness that I had when I was a kid. But this was a big deal, and I actually still have that beta tape today because that was one of my prized possessions in my teen years. I put the movie in, and it was great. You can just pause it and go to the bathroom and not miss a moment, and you can see everything that you want as slow as you want. And the big thing when that beta tape ended is that the film ends with "to be continued." The DeLorean flies into the sky, and it says "to be continued." And that was not in the theatrical version. And when that came on the screen, I lost my mind. That I couldn't believe it. They were going to make a sequel, because at the time that the film came out, it was the #1 film in 1985. It was #1 longer than any movie. Beat out all the other contenders, including Rocky IV and all the other films that came out that year. But the idea that there was a sequel had never been discussed. There was just no talk of it. And I know that when they made the movie, that Zemeckis and Gale had said if they knew they were going to do a sequel, they would never have put Jennifer in the DeLorean at the end. And I totally agree with that. As a writer, now I see the problem. I mean, when they do get to the future, they knock Jennifer out for the majority of it, because you just can't have her in the story and then do the actions that you want to do, because you'd have to stop and explain everything to her for an hour and a half. You have to have Doc talking to her, cut to the clock as it goes around a few times, and then cut back and where she says, "Oh, I get it." But no, when that "to be continued" came on the screen, I just thought, I can't believe it. It was fantastic. It was in the right font. It was great. And I can remember going back to the theater to see it again at the Alondra 6, just to make sure I hadn't missed that "to be continued." And no, it wasn't there. The movie just ends with the DeLorean going into the future. So I had that beta, and for the next 3 years, that's all there was to Back to the Future was home video release. I went around to all the video stores in the area. I tried to get everything I could. I ended up getting the video store standee of the poster art. I even had a weird countertop display of Marty where when you turn it on, the video box would rise and fall and rise and fall. The only thing that eluded me was they did a silk screen banner with on dowel rods that hung down. No video store would give that up. Somebody always had that earmarked because it was really beautiful. And it's funny that I have one now, and I think I just got it not a few months ago because they never show up for sale, and when they do, they're really expensive. And I think I got this one for under $20 shipped on eBay. So that was a good find because I'd always wanted that in my collection. So what the movie meant to me it just turned my life around. I immediately embraced drama at school, and I tried my hand writing some one-act plays because the power of Back to the Future is in the words, because without a lot of flash, it's just about the story, and the story of Marty interrupting his parents and his mom falling for him, and then even she realizes at the when they're parked at the dance that something's not right. And what a brilliant move that is, to have Lorraine actually sense that something's not right. I'm sure that Back to the Future has been discussed, for years. I don't know what different take I can offer on it, only to say that I wanted to live there. I wanted to be a part of that movie. And what I did was, you have to find ways to cope. You have to find ways to become a part of it. It's so easy now. I'm always telling my kids how lucky they are that they live in a time where if you like somebody's work, some writer or producer or celebrity star, actor, you can engage them somehow through all these social media outlets. If it's somebody worth their salt, they're available on there to interact with. It's totally alien to me as far as what I grew up with, where you had to seek people out. So later that summer in 1986, at the time, The Cosby Show was the number one show on TV. The number two show was Family Ties, and it was taped right at Paramount Studios in Hollywood, right there on Melrose. And so 1986, that summer, my mom and I camped out overnight on the street to get tickets to a taping of the show. It was the only way to get them. You had to be first in line when the ticket box opened. So we sat there all night. We had a few friends with us, but everybody knew we were there to get me in to see a taping of Family Ties and somehow get to Michael J. Fox. And the reason that became so important was that at the time he was the biggest film star in the world. Back to the Future catapulted him into the stratosphere of just most widely known. He couldn't make a move. And there was a television show similar to a show that had aired a few years earlier called Fantasy, where you could write in and say what your fantasy was, and it was people meeting stars or hang gliding or whatever it was. Well, I heard about this show because it was in the paper, and I was a big nerd. I was a kid who read the paper, and I wrote a letter and said, my dream is to meet Michael J. Fox and talk to him about Back to the Future. Now, I sent the letter out because, nothing ventured, nothing gained, right? And they actually contacted my mom and had quite a few phone calls, and it culminated in my mother not telling me where we were going and going down to a production office in Hollywood. And she went in, I had no idea why we were there. But it turned out that the nice people sitting next to me were actually interviewing me undercover to see how I would react on camera and did I, was I going to be good for the show? And they loved me, and they wanted this to really happen. And they talked to Michael J. Fox's agent the next week, and this was going to happen. And then Michael J. Fox's agent simply told the company that he was overexposed. He was being asked to endorse a million products and appear at a million events, and he just couldn't be everywhere at once, and they were really sorry. But even though this kid was his number one fan, Mr. Fox did not have time to meet with him. So my mother finally spilled the beans on that, and oh my God, I was crushed. I had gotten so close to a one-on-one meeting with Michael J. Fox, and it didn't work out. So we hatched this plan that we were going to get in to see Family Ties down at Paramount. So like I said, we camped out overnight, and the next morning the ticket box opened, and we got Family Ties taping tickets numbered 1 and 2. They were all numbered. So when they opened it up later, we were going to be the first two in, my mom and me. Well, again, remember, at the time, not Back to the Future, Family Ties was the number 2 show on TV. It was NBC's Thursday night lineup, and it was huge. So everybody wanted to get into a taping of Family Ties. Everybody. I think that Cosby Show was filmed in New York, so West Coasters, if you wanted to get that high up on the Nielsen rating, taping-wise, Family Ties was your best option. Consequently, all the cast and crew had taken all the tickets, and they were called industry tickets or media tickets, studio tickets, and they were stamped in red. And we didn't have those. We had the black stamped numbered tickets. So the page there at the door, he was really friendly. He knew we were there all night to do this, and he was really trying to work with us to get us in. But finally, he had to admit, he said, look, you guys aren't going to get in because we're overbooked. The studio tickets have taken every seat in the bleachers there for the taping. And I thought the world was going to end. They offered us tickets to see a bunch of other shows that were being taped that same night. And I know that my friend David Lewis went and saw a show called Sanchez of Bel Air. And he was like, you should just go see this one, Jeff. It's a show. We've come down here. You know, you're going to sit on the street. And I was like, no, man, we're getting in to see that Family Ties. They can't keep me out. I have got to get in there. We've camped out overnight. We've done everything. How can they keep us out? So my mom, just like she did at Worldcon, she worked her magic. And next thing I know, she's talking to a guy there, a really handsome, good-looking guy that she rightly assumed was an actor on the show. He was a guest star that week. Now, this is the episode where Mallory and Nick run off to get married. It's a very good episode, and at one point, Alex Keaton brings a guy home from college and says, I want you to marry this guy, Mallory. He's got this grade point average. He's going to go to this Ivy League college, and basically that he says, if you don't marry him, I will. And he hugs the guy. I think the guy has like 1 or 2 lines. He's not even listed on the IMDb for the episode, so I was going to look him up and thank him for what he did, because this guy talked to my mom, handed her 2 studio tickets, 2 red stamped studio tickets, and you know what the page did? The page looked at him. He knew what had gone down. He knew we didn't have those tickets a few minutes prior. He looked at my mom and he says, looks like you guys got media tickets right this way. You have to get in. You're obligated to get in. We're obligated to find you a seat because you've got the right kind of tickets. Well, he takes us in, and the bleachers where you watch the taping, and it was amazing. I was right there. You can see the Keaton house. You can see the kitchen. You can see the living room. And then off to the side, they had Nick's apartment. I didn't quite know what it was at the time, but it was Nick's apartment. But there were no seats in the bleachers. And the guy looks, and he says, any normal time, we would tell you can't come in because there's no seats. But we had these studio tickets, the magic red stamp studio tickets, which I still have here somewhere. And he says, we're going to find you a seat. So this guy, to his credit, he put us in the green room. And the green room is right off the set. We went down the bleachers, onto the floor, by the cameras, past them into a door that led further into the soundstage. And there my mom and I are sitting on a plush couch with a table full of snacks and big monitors. Now, the downside is that we weren't going to get to watch the live taping of the show. But the upside was that we were next to the dressing rooms. So anytime an actor had to make an entrance, they walked by us. So sitting there for the 45 minutes or so that the show taped, all the actors are walking back and forth. And I was going crazy. Like, there's Justine Bateman, Tina Yothers, Michael Gross, Meredith Baxter Birney, and there's Michael J. Fox. He's just walking back and forth. My mind nearly exploded. Marty McFly in the flesh was right there. Now, he's Alex Keaton this night, but to me, he was everything. He was Alex Keaton. He was Michael J. Fox. He was Marty McFly. And there he was. So the taping ends. The cast takes their bows. And the page had told us to just hang tight, and he would come get us and escort us out. Well, my mom, being my mom, she gets up and she says, "We're going in." And I said, "What do you mean we're going in? The guy said we had to wait." She says, "We're going in." My mother took me through that door, and we were there. We were on the set. I was in the Keaton living room. I couldn't believe it. Like, talk about your dream coming true. Now, this wasn't sitting in a DeLorean or traveling through time or anything like that, but it was pretty darn close. Because in the 80s, it was tough to do this, but I had made something on TV real to me. And I can remember meeting Tina Yothers and Meredith Baxter Birney and Justine Bateman, getting their autograph on a TV guide, which I still have. I didn't get Michael Gross's autograph. He was preoccupied with something else. And, of course, the biggest crowd was surrounding Michael J. Fox. The guy couldn't move 5 feet. And my mother went over, and she grabbed him by the arm. And she said, "Mr. Fox, I have your number one fan over here." And he looked at her, and he said, "Oh, I'll be right with you." And we stood off to the side. He did his rounds with all the people he had to talk to that he was obligated to. And then Michael J. Fox walked over to me, and he shook my hand, and I said, it is an unbelievable honor to meet you." Of course, I was 14 at the time, or 13 at the time. No, 14. So I must have said, "It's an unbelievable honor to meet you." He shook my hand. He saw that I wanted him to sign a TV guide, and he said, "Oh, that you got to have a picture." So, he's Michael J. Fox. You know that scene in Indiana Jones and the Last Crusade where Hitler runs across Indiana Jones and he sees the Grail diary and he holds his hand back and a pen appears because somebody knows that the guy needs a pen? Now, I'm not comparing Michael J. Fox to Hitler, but I am comparing it to, he basically just held his hand back. Somebody handed him an 8x10 and then a Sharpie, and he signed it to me. "Jeff, a pleasure, Michael J. Fox." And he handed it to me, and he said it was really nice to meet me, and that he hoped I continue to watch the show and his movies, and I assured him that I would. And I talk about, like, I've never done drugs. I've never been drunk, but that was the closest to being completely high. I just couldn't believe it. I had met my hero at the height of his stardom, right at the height of, still, even a year later, the Back to the Future machine. And we turned, and there was the page holding the chain open to go up into the bleachers and out. And he just gave us a nod like he knew. And I never got that guy's name, and it was a time where you didn't have a camera with you at all times like you do now. So there's no photos, and we had some damage once, and I lost that 8x10, which was a real tragedy. But the fact that I've never done drugs and never been drunk means that my memory is really sharp, and I can remember that day like it was yesterday. And Michael J. Fox was such a gentleman and such a professional, and knew right away what the deal was. Like, he knew that I was just this kid, and he'd probably seen that look a million times, and he just treated me so nice. And I've met some celebrities in the intervening years. I've met a ton of celebrities, and a lot of them aren't nice. A lot of them don't want to take the time. And this guy, he was working. It wasn't like he was in an autograph line or grocery shopping. Like, he was working. This guy had just taped his show. It probably was the culmination of a long week, and I know that at the end of the tapings, they traditionally go out to dinner, to this big party, and he stopped everything to hang out with this kid and talk to him. So it couldn't have been better. And I wish I could meet him now and just tell him what that meant to me back then, and just the high that it sent me on for years after, of meeting just my hero, Marty McFly, Alex P. Keaton, Michael J. Fox. So there were ways that I kept Back to the Future alive back then. I watched it so much that I bet if I had a beta player that worked and I put that beta tape in, it probably wouldn't even work. It probably would just tell me, look, dude, you've watched it enough, put the Blu-ray in. So on time marched. There was a cool moment, almost cool moment in that same year, 1986, when my friend Eric Hardy and I went to Equicon at the Pasadena Hilton, which was a spring convention, sci-fi nerd convention, and we volunteered at it so we wouldn't have to pay for tickets, and we didn't have a room, so we actually just slept in the hotel. That's a story for another time. But one of the guests scheduled to appear there was Rick Carter, who was the production designer on Back to the Future, and he was supposed to have the brainwave analyzer and a few other props. And I was so excited to get to see those. Sadly, he didn't make it. He didn't make it to that show. So I've never actually seen the brainwave analyzer in the flesh. I've never seen. There's a lot of Back to the Future props that I don't know where they're at. I know that I've been to a few Planet Hollywoods that had hoverboards, and there were hoverboards in the loading area of the Back to the Future ride at Universal Studios. But who knows if those are real? There was a thing where I was certain that Planet Hollywood, a lot of their stuff might have been repro. I know that there was a rumor that the Star Wars stuff was all reproduction because Lucasfilm wasn't going to let a restaurant have their stuff. So who knows? I know that I read Starlog every issue, hoping to get any news about Back to the Future, and even at a bigger fever pitch when it was when that sequel thing came up in the videotape. There was a great article in the Starlog about Back to the Future called "The Other Marty McFly," and it talked about a black blip that's in the background when Doc and Marty are at the mall. And this great article went on to say that when Doc throws his gun, there's a black blip on the back wall of the mall, and that's Marty McFly falling down the hill at the end of the movie. When Marty has come back and he sees Doc get shot and he falls down the hill. So that blew my mind, and I freeze framed that beta so I could see, and it's on the film. You can see it on the film clear as day. There is a black blip, and I think the writer even contacted Zemeckis and Gale to ask, was this planned? Because if it was planned, it's one of the greatest movie Easter eggs of all time, because it says that they're keeping track of things, even if it doesn't really work in continuity, because at the time Marty can't be in both places because he hasn't done it yet, unless we're in a loop. Unless we're in a time loop. But certainly the idea was just amazing that this guy had seen this, had come up with this idea. He wrote this great story that extrapolated what would happen after that and moving into future adventures. And I just assumed like that was going to be the natural progression of the movies, that the sequel would be them going into the future and then into, I think that the writer said he talked about going back to the Salem witch trials and having Doc get mistaken for a warlock, and there were a lot of really cool ideas there, and it just sparked everybody's certainly sparked my imagination of what the sequel was going to be. We just couldn't wait for the sequel. I took a class in high school, stop motion animation, taught by Mrs. Russell, who we were convinced was drunk in class most of the time, and I think she was. She actually made the news a few years after I left high school when some students in her class videotaped themselves smoking pot while she's up there teaching. So we knew, right? But I did a little stop motion movie called Into the Future, with a DeLorean and a truck, and I think it starred Gumby as Marty McFly. You know, what are you going to do? But no, we just assumed that the sequel would be called Into the Future, or it would have a different title. When it was finally announced that it was going to be called Back to the Future Part 2, it was amazing. It's got a title. You know, it's not an imaginative title, but what are you going to do? It's name recognition. You know, I get it. I know that the working title was Paradox, but there was no way Universal was going to let them use that title for a movie. You know, Paradox is that's a weird name for a movie. All the smart kids watching the movie got it, why it was called Paradox during the filming. They showed a bunch of stuff in, believe it or not, the National Enquirer did a big article about revelations that were going to come up in the movie. And then what happened was really cool. Working at the video store, you came in contact with a lot of people, a lot of strange people. You know, people who rent movies were some of the weirdest people, and we had people that would come in day after day after day to rent movies. Well, this guy comes in, and he tells me he works at an editing house, and he's got Back to the Future 2 footage, and he wants, you know, to trade it or give it to me. I don't remember the exact deal that went down, but I remember getting the tape, and it was the Biff Tannen Museum. And if you see the Biff Tannen Museum tape, and I think that eventually it ended up with, I sold it to the guy who runs backtothefuture.com, bttf.com. He's a great guy, huge Back to the Future guy. Like, talk about a guy who took it and ran with it. That's Stephen Clark, fantastic guy. I've dealt with him a few times. It's nice that he's the collector of all that stuff, and he doesn't hoard it. He's very happy to share it with the world, and he has the platform to do that, so I give it up to him. But watching the Biff Tannen Museum tape before the movie came out, I didn't know what to think, because it shows Biff, young Biff, going to the racetrack and winning over and over again, and I didn't know to look for the almanac in his pocket. You know, I hadn't seen the movie yet. I didn't know the plot. Then it shows Biff marrying Lorraine, which I was floored. He's marrying Lorraine, Marty's mom, back in the 70s. So what happened to George McFly when the countdown began for the movie to come out, Thanksgiving weekend, I think it was Thanksgiving weekend, 1989, I was on pins and needles. I couldn't wait. So my friends and I, we went up to the Cineplex Odeon at Universal Studios, which was the big theater around. And the reason we went there and not the Lakewood was that they were going to show the movie at midnight, and I didn't have to wait. Like, we got there, and they had been running a countdown for weeks with a big picture of the poster, synchronize your watches, the future's coming back or something, and it was counting down, and we got in line for hours to see that movie at the Cineplex Odeon. Now, we could have waited the next afternoon and seen it at Lakewood for $4 or $3, but we saw it at the Cineplex Odeon. I think it was like $8.50 or something. It was ridiculous, the price, and forget about getting any snacks. It was the most expensive snack bar ever, but it was Back to the Future 2, and the movie opens, and now leading up to that, we had watched all the commercials, and it was still, you couldn't quite grasp what the plot of the movie was. You knew they were going to the future, and they showed some clips in the commercial of what the future was going to look like. And there was a really close brush with Fame months earlier when we found out that Back to the Future 2 was filming on the back lot, and that Hill Valley had been transformed into Hill Valley 2015, and they were looking for extras. And I went down the minute I heard and tried to be an extra in the movie. But they were looking for very specific looks, and whatever it was, I didn't have it. I didn't make it. I would have died to be in the movie. Are you kidding? But it didn't happen. And the funny part to that is I got the notice during school, And I went into drama class and went to my teacher, Maggie, and I said, this is what's going down. And she said, you got to go. And she let me out of school early, and I ran, got in the car with friends, and we took off to get in that line. And, yeah, we didn't make it. But we watched all the commercials leading up to the release of the movie. And my friend Greg made a really cool synopsis of Back to the Future 1 that led into all of the available footage from Part 2, all of the commercials, the car flying through the air, and Marty Jr. being slammed onto the counter, and Marty saying he's a complete wimp. I mean, we watched this footage over and over again, just trying to figure out what was the movie about, because the commercials were perplexing. We knew they went to the future, and that was it. Was it 2 hours in the future? Was that all the movie was? I mean, that would have been fine. We had learned to trust Zemeckis and Gale implicitly, and whatever they had cooked up in Part 2, I was more than ready for. So you can imagine my surprise when Back to the Future 2 opens with a rehash of the end of Back to the Future 1, with one difference of Biff coming out and seeing the DeLorean fly into the air, and he's got his matchbooks, which obviously play a big role later. But you got that great extra shot of the DeLorean flying into the sky, and for someone like me who knew the movie backwards and forwards, that shot, that side shot of the DeLorean going into the sky, made up for the fact that for some reason Elizabeth Shue was in the movie, and for some reason they didn't just watch Back to the Future 1 and then redo the end scene. Like it's not a complete exact match, and I'm not sure why it isn't, because it would have been very easy to just, if the kid at home has got it on beta, and at that time VHS, and just a few months away from having it on Laserdisc, certainly the studio could have said, hey, why don't you guys watch it first and then reenact it, because it's not quite exact the way it's supposed to be. But again, it's forgiven for that shot of the DeLorean, because it just was like a new. Because in the first film, the DeLorean drives down the street, lifts off, and then flies toward camera. In Part 2, you get a great shot, a side shot of the DeLorean taking off. Oh, I was awestruck, and that was just a little hint, and probably a planted hint, that what the rest of the film had in store for us was, yes, they were going to go into the future. They had no choice. Up earlier, they got to go into the future. But what nobody knew was that the future was going to be just a small portion of the movie. And what they really had planned, and what the movie really was about, was they were going to go back into Part 1 and show you some of the most iconic scenes from a different angle. Now, this didn't play well with a lot of audiences, and the movie got slammed for being confusing and strange. And you know what? It's all of that. But what it really is, and what it mostly is it's amazing, because Back to the Future 2 is the only sequel of its kind where you get a new story, but you get to go and look at the other story from around the corner, or something that happened earlier in the day that Marty wasn't there for. Because in the first film, you follow Marty and Doc exclusively, and in this one, because Marty's watching from afar, we get to see Lorraine picking up her dress from the frock shop. We get to see Biff getting his car back from repair, and how much it costs, and why he's so angry at Marty later in the movie, and all these things that come into play, that if you're a big fan of the movie, and obviously I was immersed in it, here was a movie that said, we're going to play to you. We're going to give you the sequel that no one else is going to dare try. Because we've got a time machine, we can go back into the film. I was blown away. Now, it does have its problems, but it's not the problems everybody else has with it, as far as I couldn't understand why the 1985 sequence looks the way it does. Why is Marty's house? I mean, I got all that. Everything had been changed. The only thing that didn't make sense in the theatrical version is why old Biff disappears. And we wouldn't get the answer to that for the masses until the Kirk Cameron Back to the Future special, where he showed you all the deleted scenes. But the theatrical version, we didn't know why old Biff disappeared. You were just left to assume that something happened to him or he died in the process. I don't know. But it's a small bump. There's another one where when Marty from the first film is supposed to be playing Johnny B. Goode, those of us who watched the movie over and over, we knew every move. I used to do that at school. Like, I would reenact that in the drama room, the entire Johnny B. Goode sequence, because I'm a big friggin' nerd. So in the second film, when he doesn't do it exactly like we remember, it's fairly obvious to those who've watched the movie a lot. Michael J. Fox does really key moments and key facial expressions that are not present in the second movie. But I guess you're just supposed to say you're not supposed to be watching that. You should be watching the other Marty in the leather jacket and the pork pie hat above him in the scaffolding, in the lighting rig. But those are small things, because what you do get is you get a really cool couple of shots of George at the dance that are not in the first film. You get bizarre moments of Marty in the leather jacket, part 2 Marty going under the car while part 1 Marty is in the car with his mom, and that's a scene that it plays out. You get to see an extended version of that scene. Like, there's so many little gems in that movie that those who get caught up in the idea that it's confusing or that it's not what they wanted really lose out on, because the film has so many little winks and nods to those of us who love the movie and just wanted to experience it again. We got that, and I don't think you're never going to see a sequel like that again. No studio's ever going to take a risk on a sequel that bizarre, because Universal wanted a Back to the Future sequel, and I know the original script, which I've read for part 2, was Marty interrupting George and Lorraine conceiving him. So that he's still not going to be born, because even though he's gotten them together, the weekend that they're supposed to go away and have this romantic date and make him, he interrupts because it's the 60s and he's on the college campus and they're protesting, and it's a really cool script, but it wasn't what they wanted to make. And I think if I remember correctly from some of the making of stuff, it was Zemeckis who said, we have a real opportunity here to make a sequel unlike any other. And they did in spades, because Zemeckis had just come off of Roger Rabbit, where he had pioneered and he had pushed ILM to do these scenes with cartoon characters and stuff that should not exist on the screen. This is long before any kind of real impactful CGI, not counting the stained glass night in Young Sherlock Holmes or the cartoonish spaceships of The Last Starfighter, but really what would become invisible special effects, where you're not even aware you're watching them. And what he pushed ILM to do in Back to the Future 2 was to have multiple Michael J. Foxes on the screen and you not have any idea how they did it. And the dinner sequence in Back to the Future 2, where old Marty pours a drink to his son, who then gets fruit, and his daughter is in the same shot. It's absolutely amazing. It seems so pedestrian now. Like, you could probably do that at home with software, but at the time, that shot took forever, and it's so mind-boggling because it's made to be invisible. It's made so that you're not supposed to notice how amazing that it is. So for a guy who would become a film geek, because mainly Back to the Future, seeing Back to the Future 2 with all these invisible tricks. Back to the Future 2 contains one of my favorite transitions from special effect to practical, when the DeLorean comes back from the future into the alternate 1985 and comes down the street in the air, and then as it comes behind a lamppost, becomes a practical DeLorean that then parks at Jennifer Parker's house. I was blown away. Like, as a film nerd and who had studied all the special effects stuff in Starlog and Cinefantastique and whatever I get my hands on, we knew the matte line or the transition line was that pole, and what we applauded as nerds in the audience was the balls to put a shot like that in the movie and to push the crew into making it happen, because it's easy just to do a cut to go from the DeLorean flying in the air to cut, DeLorean is landing. But Zemeckis is always pushing for more. Make it seamless, make it flawless, make it so good that it looks as if there's no alternative other than they really did it. And that's the hallmark of Back to the Future 2, is that there are so many shots like that that just look convincing. And when he did the making of and made that joke about hoverboards, the hoverboard sequence is so good and so seamless that we had no choice but to believe him. If this guy's telling us that they've got hoverboards and they're in the movie, and you see the movie and the hoverboards look the way they do, how could we not believe that they really do exist? And we were angry for years at whatever toy company is holding on to these things and not giving them to us, because, man, did I want self-lacing shoes and a self-sizing jacket and a hoverboard more than anything, because I had spent 4 years as Marty McFly from the first film, so I was ready for a new look, and I wanted to be Marty McFly from the second film. I wasn't willing to wear my pants inside out, but I was interested in looking that way. Marty's Volterra board was gone, and in was the hoverboard. Now, I wasn't going to carry a pink Mattel hoverboard. They didn't make them, so there was no opportunity, and I wasn't savvy enough to figure out how to put one together. But I had made a lot of friends, and I did end up quite quickly with a direct copy of the Sports Almanac, which I'm looking at right now. I still have it. And that was just cool, because I'd carry that around at conventions and just blow people's mind. I think you can get on eBay now for 50 cents if you look hard enough, or just download it somewhere. But back then, you had to know somebody to get stuff like that, and it was not easy to get. It was a challenge, any kind of Back to the Future stuff. Now, Back to the Future 2 did have its share of merchandise. They finally had decided, like, we're going to put some merchandise out, and we're going to make this movie have stuff. The problem is that Michael J. Fox wouldn't sign. He wouldn't sign his likeness away. So all of the stuff for Back to the Future 2 is really strange, generic stuff. Applause did hoverboard pencils with with hoverboards on the top, the pit bull and the Japanese flag looking one. Nothing of the Mattel one. They didn't make anything of the pink one. They did the pit bull and some of the generic ones. And then buttons that were the logo, or weird ones that kind of look like the Hill Valley Mall 2015 logo of the lightning hitting it, and then one of the Future Is Now with some person that looked like they were wearing headphones or something. I don't know. I just remember seeing it all, and they had a pencil with, or a pen with the DeLorean on, and that was I liked that. And they had a 3D little plastic DeLorean. This was stuff I had to buy it because there was nothing else to hang your hat on. There was no other merchandise. I had resorted to taking the one Hot Wheel I had with gull-wing doors and putting clay on it to give it the back exhaust vents of the DeLorean. It looked like crud, but it was all I had, But there was, the little bit of stuff you purchased, and because I knew people, I don't think I'd worked at the store yet, but I was very close to getting a job at the video store. I told them to save all the displays for me, so I ended up with all those displays. It was nothing real exciting. The big piece of merchandise from Part 2 was the lenticular hat, the rainbow hat that Marty Jr. wears in the future. And I had heard that they had these at Universal Studios for sale. So my friend Greg and I, we raced down there, and we did the shtick where we got a shopper's pass, and then we went out the gate and got our hand stamp, and then went back in for the day. And they had the hats, and I think they were cheap. $15, $18 or something, and I bought that hat, and oh my God, I wore that thing everywhere. I looked like a complete dork, but I didn't care. It was Marty Jr.'s hat, and it was unlike anything that had been out. This was the first piece of real replica stuff. And I think at some point after that, Universal Studios also had the license plates, both the Out of Time and the barcode one of the future DeLorean. But I had the hat, and the hat was important because it gave me the genesis of wanting the jacket, the Marty Jr. Self-sizing jacket. So I contacted this little seamstress who lived down the road in Norwalk, and I took her all these pictures and I sketched it, and I had a jacket. I had a jacket that looked enough like Marty's jacket that you knew exactly what it was supposed to be. It didn't do anything fancy, but it did have accordion sleeves so that it gave the appearance that it could be a different size. And oh man, did I love that jacket. I wish I still had it. I ended up selling it on eBay for a lot of money. But, you know, as I got older, I wish I'd kept it. I think it ended up going to Australia to a collector who's got it out there somewhere. But if you're listening, I would love to buy it back from you. They've never made a really nice replica of the jacket. I know that I think there's a Ruby's version, but it looks really cheap. I wouldn't buy that. You know, I'd rather just do a custom one again if I was going to make one. Not that I need to run around as Marty anymore. I think I'm a little older than that. My wife always jokes that I've gone from being able to dress up as Marty that now I should dress up either as George or as Doc Brown. So we saw Back to the Future 2 opening night, and we knew early on that there was going to be a part 3 the next summer. You know, Universal had tried to get word out that there was going to be a second sequel, and I think they did that simply because the second one was going to end on a cliffhanger. They didn't want people walking out of the theater completely irate. Now, this is a trick that had only been done rarely before. I know that the Superman movie filmed stuff for a sequel early in the run, and there was a Three Musketeers movie, but I think they got into trouble where actors were upset that they were filming a movie that was going to be made into 2 and they weren't getting paid for both, blah, blah, blah. I know that Crispin Glover doesn't appear in Back to the Future 2 due to contract negotiations. He felt he should get as much as the principals, and they just didn't think he was going to have a big enough part for that. It would be interesting to know, like, when they decided to move forward with the version of the sequel that they made, of they were going to go back into the original movie and such, if they had known they were going to have Crispin Glover involved, would they have made the same movie? Would it have featured George a lot more? Because, you know, George doesn't appear a lot because they didn't have a replacement. They didn't know what they were going to do. In the future, it's another actor, Jeffrey Weissman, who's upside down. Anything they can do to disguise that it's not Crispin Glover. And they did get in trouble for that because a lot of people just assumed that it was. But from a writer standpoint, they had to kill him, and it was a big plot point, but they didn't have a choice because the actor wasn't going to be in the movie. And rather than replace him with somebody doing a Crispin Glover impression, and Weissman did a good job with what he had. I mean, he's upside down in old age makeup. He did fine, but they couldn't have used him in the 50s sequence because I don't think he looked enough like Glover and his mannerisms to pull it off convincing, and I don't think they wanted to do that. So they just wrote him out. You know, they used footage from the first movie. They did some trickery, some deleted scenes, and they made it. You know, it was convincing enough. It was good enough. But what the film does, we knew that 3 was coming. They give you that trailer right away. They let you know part 3 is coming 7 months away. You only have to wait 7 months, and you're going to get this movie, and you get to see quick shots of. Now I do all this from memory. I have not just watched this. I've not watched Back to the Future in a few months. So, and I'm not the trailer hardly ever at all, but. You get to see a few shots of Marty getting dragged around and Doc with the gun, I think. But then there's that really the iconic shot of Doc and Marty at the dedication of the clock tower, and they get their picture taken. And I can remember leaving the theater on such a high, like they were going to go back to the beginning of Hill Valley and show Doc and Marty, whatever the adventure was, and we didn't know what it was going to be. But they were going to be there for the dedication of the clock. And that's such a cool thing because who better to be there at the beginning and to show. And I know that Zemeckis and Gale had always said that Hill Valley was the other character in the movie, that Marty and Doc and Lorraine and George and Biff were the characters, but there was another character, and they wanted to show the town changing over the years, and how in the 50s it was bright and cheery, in the 80s it was a little darker and dirtier, and then going back to 1885, showing the town springing up out of the desert, and they had taken that from It's a Wonderful Life, and had shown that in It's a Wonderful Life that Bedford Falls was just as much a character as George Bailey. And to me, Hill Valley was just as much a character. I studied every inch of it, from a guy who wanted to live there. I wanted to know that when I got there, I wouldn't get lost and where everything was in relation. And the town does become a character. And by 3, or the trailer for 3, when you see that they're going to be around for the town being built, how cool is that? That inspired a lot of my own writing, of messing with the timeline and seeing places at different times and how they change and how they adapt. And Hill Valley was the genesis of all that. So we left the theater on a high, and I saw Back to the Future 2 quite a few times in the theater. And then I bought it on VHS by the time it came out. I had graduated to VHS by then. I had to. They stopped making beta tapes, so you're out of luck unless you got VHS. Which was funny, because to me the VHS tapes were always so much bigger and clunkier, and I was used to that compact beta feel, So 7 months later, we were primed for Back to the Future 3. We were ready for it. It was hop, skip, and a jump after waiting 4 years between 1 and 2. 7 months was easy time. And then we found out that they were going to do a screening of 1, 2, and then the premiere of 3 at the Cinerama Dome up in Hollywood. The Cinedome, the Cinerama Dome. I've heard it called both times, both ways. So yeah, I took the day off from school. I take it back. I wasn't in school at the time. I graduated by then. I took the day off from work, and my friends and I, we went down all day, camped out all day, and there I was in my my Back to the Future 2 jacket and my lenticular hat with my pockets pulled out to be Marty Jr. They had a DeLorean there to take your picture with, and I got my picture with the DeLorean. And I got interviewed on the news by Phil Schumann. And then later in the afternoon, I was up front, and there Robert Zemeckis and Bob Gale were there. And these were my heroes. I was in awe, Michael J. Fox wasn't going to show up for this. He was off doing something else. And I got upset, but I'd already met him, so it wasn't like it was the end of the world. But meeting Robert Zemeckis and Bob Gale was like, oh my gosh, these are the guys that created it. And I'll never forget asking Robert Zemeckis for a picture. He was more than happy to take a picture with me, and I've got a great picture of us together. He wanted to know about the jacket, and he brought Bob Gale over, and he said, hey, look at this kid. And he goes, hey, kid, what'd you pay for that jacket? And I said, it's about $40. He said, hey, Bob Gale, what the one in the movie cost? And Gale's like, I don't know, 10 grand. He's like, this kid found a real bargain. And they loved my jacket and my hat. And I got my picture. And Bob Gale, after the grueling back-to-back shoots of 2 and 3, was wearing a shirt that said Back to the Future 4 with a circle and a line through it. He wanted everybody there to know there was never going to be a Back to the Future 4. That after they had gone through so much, putting 2 movies out back-to-back, that close. Now they do it. They get a whole year, they get 2 years or a year and a half. Virtually both movies had to be ready at the same time to get them into theaters, Everything's digital now, but back then movies had to be delivered early so they could run copies of it. It was all done by hand. So he wanted you to know there was not going to be a Back to the Future 4. But I got my picture, and then Leah Thompson was there, and I had worshipped Leah Thompson forever since Back to the Future 1. And there she was, I got my picture with her. It was fantastic, I saw Howard the Duck twice in theaters because of Leah Thompson. Let's say that again, shall we? I saw Howard the Duck twice in theaters because of Leah Thompson. Yeah. Okay, moving on. Back to the Future 3. So we went in and we got to see Back to the Future 1 and then 2, and then we were ready, man. The lights dimmed and Back to the Future 3 on the big screen. It opened with the new Universal Anniversary logo, which started with the old logos, then morphed into the new one. And we thought that was for Back to the Future 3. So we were like, hey, we're getting a special logo. We didn't realize that it was for all their movies moving forward at the time. But yeah, Back to the Future 3 was fantastic. Marty goes in the Old West, Doc has a storyline with Clara Clayton. It had a real similar feel to the first one, and it was always called like a return to form. I never called it that because I didn't think that Part 2 had dipped at all. The story was a continual thread all the way through, I could follow it. The difference between 2 and 3 is simply that 3 slows down. There's no frantic. Once Marty revs up and goes back in time, they don't mess around traveling anywhere till the very end. So it's a real slow down from the second movie, and it gives Doc a nice chance to have a romance. And Christopher Lloyd had said it was his first on-screen kiss, and it was with Mary Steenburgen. And I had watched a whole bunch of all their projects in the years in between, and they were in Going South together with Jack Nicholson, which is another Western. So here they were in this Western. And it was great, too, because so many things come back into play from Part 2 with Wild Gunman and Marty knowing how to shoot from 7-Eleven. And, there's the whole Don't Call Me Chicken subplot, which, like I said before, I don't mind that because you got to give the main character something to overcome, and they hadn't planned on both these movies. So here they gave Marty a chance to redeem himself by not letting words bother him, and I thought it was all great. I remember the audience gasping when Seamus moves to hand the baby to Marty at the dinner table, and we were stunned because we all knew it was a special effect, but we'd never seen a special effect where the same actor was going to hand himself a baby, and it was a really big up moment, like, oh my God, from Part 2 where they had done, Doc had handed himself a wrench, and Marty had poured himself water, that sort of thing. Or, Marty had taken the hat off of Marty Jr., but here was a baby, which couldn't be faked. And it went by so fast in the theater that we gasped, and then it was over, and we were back in the story. But you watch it on Blu-ray now, and they cover up the transition with Seamus's wife, Leah Thompson, walking by, and it's awkward. It's awkward, but at the time, that was the way you did it. So I forgive them completely. It was real gutsy to do a move like that. But the movie has a lot of seamless effects again, where you're in the Old West. It's not high-tech like the second one. And the effects, they just sort of go away. I mean, the idea that Seamus and Marty are the same guy, eventually you don't even see it. It's just two characters, And she's Maggie McFly. And you go, well, why is he married to this character? Because George doesn't get with Lorraine until 1955, and they're in 1885. It doesn't really match up. But I know that Bob Gale and Zemeckis had said, well, we weren't going to make the movie without Leah Thompson. So you just go, the McFly men are attracted to the same kind of women through the years. That's a great rationale. Why get a new actress in there, put somebody in that we like, and have her part of the movie, and you just come up with a reason. They all like the same kind of women. Done. Okay. The only real problem I had with 3 was I was a nerd, and it didn't have any Huey Lewis. It has ZZ Top instead, and I really wanted to hear some more Huey Lewis. But, hey, ZZ Top's in it. They do a funny bit at the dance. It's all great. The person who really comes to life in 3 is Tom Wilson. His Mad Dog Tannen is just such an amazingly real, fully fleshed out character. In the first one, I think he even described himself as a speed bump in the plot. Biff is somebody to be overcome very quickly. In the second one, he's much more menacing as old Biff, and he's going to kill Marty like he killed George. There's a lot more menace to him. But in part 3, he's the main bad guy again, and he's the main obstacle. So here was a chance to make a new character. It's funny, too, like after watching the Biff Tannen Museum, they had tried a Mad Dog Tannen look in that video, but it's not the one that shows up in the movie in part 3. So if you want to compare, go watch the Biff Tannen Museum clip of Mad Dog. Compare it to the one in 3. It's not the same makeup job. They really refined it and decided what he was going to look like in the filming time there. But Tom Wilson does a fantastic job because Mad Dog's a great character. He's familiar as a Biffish kind of character, but he really does make Mad Dog a completely different and his own character. And as a guy who listens to Tom Wilson's podcast, it's great that he's such a nice guy and such a cool, continually working actor, you know. He's the main reason I watched Freaks and Geeks. It's a great show, but I watched it initially on disc because I heard Tom Wilson was in it, you know, and I tried to follow every one of the actors' careers. So Back to the Future 3 races towards its climax. You know, you get familiar stuff like Doc building the model, and there's a great shot in the 1955 sequence where Marty's got the brainwave analyzer on. Some great nods, you know, some really cool stuff that was in there just for the diehards like me. And it all wraps up nice. Now, we had read, again, in the National Enquirer that the crew had been spotted filming somewhere in California and blowing the DeLorean up. And we just couldn't believe that. We weren't certain why that was being spread, because we figured there was going to be a few more movies. They can't blow the DeLorean up. They need it to travel around. So when Marty goes into the future from 1885, and I have to tell you, the one really awful spot in the film is the overhead shot of the DeLorean coming through the time portal onto the tracks. It looks like a toy. I'm not sure why it was shot like that, and the audience that I saw with actually laughed because it looks like we've cut to Doc's model again. It doesn't make a whole lot of sense. And it's funny too because the train wreck is spectacular. For a practical effect that they only could shoot once unless they want to pay for it again, it's amazing. It really looks like they've crashed a full-size locomotive. In fact, the whole train chase is fantastic. If there's one thing Zemeckis and Gale know how to do, it's set up an action sequence where we know the stakes, we know the danger, and whatever plan they've set in place, it doesn't work. So they come up with something else, and we're always surprised by how that works. You know, in the first film, it's the amazing sequence on the clock tower where every step of the way you're convinced, okay, they've got it. He's going to go back in time, and then the car doesn't start. The cable becomes disconnected at the top. He connects it. It then becomes disconnected at the bottom, and he gets it just in time. All that's just editing, writing, pacing. It's flawless. In 2, the version they have is the sequence in the tunnel, which is the same tunnel that Eddie Valiant uses to go into Toontown. But instead, it's Marty on a hoverboard, and Biff is running him down, and it ends with the DeLorean and the flags. Like, everything that you've seen comes into play. You know, the DeLorean gets cut on the flags so that Marty gets to use it later. It's really stellar. And then it all culminates in the really amazing sequence of the train where they have to steal it, get it on the spur track. There's a point of no return. The audience is clued in so vividly with the point of no return, the colored logs, the meter. We know the stakes. We know that the bridge is out. Like, all this stuff comes into play. And then the big wrench in it is Clara's on the train, and Doc's going to go get her. Now, the shot of Doc and her floating off is a little wonky, but that's just what effects look like at the time, and I'm willing to forgive it because it's a beautiful shot that's just come on the heels of this amazing action sequence. And you get Marty putting his hat on, the lightning, and then he goes, and then the train. It's amazing. And then the finale to it is Marty crossing the tracks, and the posts are coming down, and the traffic is looking at him confused. And we think it's because the DeLorean has tripped the train crossing. But instead, there's a train coming, and Marty has to get out, and they do blow the DeLorean up. And I was shocked. I was really shocked in the premiere screening of that. I just couldn't believe they had done it. They had blown the DeLorean up. They wanted you to know it was gone. Not only do they blow it up, but it's blown to bits, and there's no way it's getting put back together. The flux capacitor gives its last spark, and then it's dead, and all that's left is the picture of Doc and Marty at the clock tower. It ends on such a high note, though, with them going back to the wreckage with Jennifer, and Marty avoiding the wreck that was mentioned in 2. What a wrap-up. Like, this event they mentioned in 2, we get to see, and the outcome, and it's really very satisfying. And then Doc appears in the train, and we get this really amazing, uplifting moment of these two characters that we've now spent 6 hours plus with, and they share this moment, and the future isn't written, and then the train goes into the sky, and then imagine my shock when it says, the end. The second one it ended with "to be concluded," and the third one ended with "the end." No question mark, no ... The end. It's over with. I left that theater that day very bittersweet because I love the way the story wrapped up. We got 3 Back to the Future movies. They ended on such a high note, but they did end, and there was no continuation of the series. It was as if I was being told, "We're done. It's time to move on. It's time to grow up." I never did grow up, but I learned to move on from it. I ended up buying them on VHS, and then I bought them on Laserdisc. Then I bought them on DVD, and now I have them on Blu-ray. So I bought them almost as many times as the Star Wars trilogy, and they actually do mean more to me than the Star Wars movies. The Star Wars movies have been so monkeyed with and perverted over the years, but Back to the Future remains the way it is, and I've seen it. I saw the first movie on a reissue in 2010 with my kids, and that was a lot of fun. And then Luke and I, my oldest, went and saw all 3 of them at the Egyptian, which was great because all 3 were presented in full digital, and you're able to see stuff you never saw before. And for a guy like me who knows the movie so well, to be able to see new stuff, I was riveted. And that was from midnight till 6 a.m. And I'll tell you, by 6 a.m. I was beat, but it was worth it because the movies do mean so much to me. I had my adventures with them. I dressed up at conventions as Marty. I've tried to keep up with some of the collectibles. I don't really have the money or the space to gather all this stuff. I'd love to have a flux capacitor and all the stuff that's come out in the years. I just don't have it's just not in the cards, Eventually, I'm getting a DeLorean. That's my dream, is to get a DeLorean. I should do a Kickstarter. Help Jeff get his DeLorean, but I don't think I'd make my goal. But I ended up finding new ways to live the movie, and I'll talk about that in another episode where I did manage to get onto Hill Valley and take pictures, and that was pretty cool. But again, another episode. I'm nearing an hour and a half on this, and as you can hear, my voice is about to give out. I've talked about Back to the Future more in one sitting by myself than I think I ever have, and certainly by myself. Normally I'm with a group of guys, and we're hashing it out over and over again. But there's still a lot to be said about Back to the Future. I've not gotten into all the people that I've met friend-wise because of these movies, or the ride, and going to the ride's opening day in costume. But another episode, I'm going to close off here as we near the hour and a half mark by saying thanks for downloading. The best way to support 91 Reasons is to give us a good rating on iTunes. And you can check out my books on Amazon.com. I've written 3 books: The Sixth Key, The Lost Station, and my third and newest book, The Infinite Backward. They feature a flying train, which, if you've been listening at all, you know where I got my inspiration from. And I do dedicate my third book to Robert Zemeckis and Bob Gale. Engine 17 is not Doc's train by any stretch. It's much different. My stories do involve time travel, but they're much different. They're my flavor and my stuff. But there is the flavor of Back to the Future, and how could there not be with a movie that a movie series I've just talked an hour and a half and could probably talk 2 more hours if my voice held on. But check out my books on Amazon.com. Find me on Facebook, and I'll see you on the next episode of 91 Reasons.
Thanks for listening to 91 Reasons. Please subscribe and leave a review on iTunes. Find us on Facebook. Is anyone even still listening?